Welcome, Canadians, people from across the country. But as we noted, it looks like Ontario is taking over our Zoom call today. That is the majority of people coming in, but we're happy to have you wherever you're from. This is our second webinar in our double series of creating buy-in for coordinated access and by name list. We've talked before about how we do webinars and community of practice calls. Our webinars are designed to provide information. Community of practice calls are designed to spend a little less time doing that and hopefully more time engaging with all of you and hearing your ideas and thoughts. So we're excited to have you on for today, and we're excited that you are here, obviously, because you want to share something. And so we're really looking forward to that. I have with me one of my colleagues from the Canadian Alliance, Lisa Bell. She's an improvement advisor with the Built for Zero program, and she has a little bit of information she's going to share with you today to kind of set the tone and tweak your thoughts about the things that you might be able to add into this conversation. So we want people to feel free. Let us know in the chat if you have a comment, or in the Q&A if you have a comment or question, and let us know if you're open to speaking out loud to the group, and then we can unmute you so that that can happen. And again, we really encourage you to share and to learn and build off of each other in this format. So with that being said, I will remind people that we are recording. The recording will be saved and available for you in a couple of days through the Training and Technical Assistance website under webinars and archives. As well as you can go in there and you can see multiple other webinars and community of practice calls that we have recorded to that you can access and review and listen to, or look at the slides, whatever your heart desires. So with that being said, I guess I will move forward. We do want to acknowledge the land that we are on, and this is kind of a generic, well, not generic, that's not a very good word, sorry for that. This is a kind of a pan-Canada land acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So thank you for letting us do that, and thank all of those who might be Indigenous on the call for your contribution to us being able to do this work, and for the work that you do, and for giving us the privilege of working on your lands. So, whoops. So just a little bit about the Canadian Alliance. As you see, our mission is to lead a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities that work together to end homelessness in Canada. And this is our organization. We have the conference, which you see now. I changed this slide. Yep, I did. And because here it is. I didn't delete the other one. Why is my old new one not on there? Anyways, the conference is, I don't know what happened. I put the new slide on. The conference is going to be virtual this year. So I apologize. I'm not sure what I did, but go ahead and go to the Canadian Alliance website at cah.ca, and you can get more information about the virtual conference in terms of dates and those kinds of things. We have Built for Zero, which many of you on the call today are a part of, but it is, a model holds lots of rigor around the use of data and supporting people through improvement advisors and coaching, and supporting communities around building coordinated access and by name list systems. And then, of course, there's the training and technical assistance program, which I'm the director of, and we do lots of training in multiple areas, typically areas of best practice around ending homelessness, housing first. We also do coordinated access and by name list training. And we do also have communities that we support in a coaching capacity towards that end goal of reducing and ending homelessness. We have the allied networks, which are lots of different partner organizations that we work with. And we have our advocacy component, which includes our Recovery for All campaign and multiple other things. So check any of them out for further information by going to the website. And you also see each of those areas have their own website that you could go to as well. It's important for us to acknowledge our funders. This webinar and others that we do are funded in part by Reaching Home from the Employment and Service Development Canada. And we're really grateful for their contribution and for the work that they do to support us in making these things possible for you. So if you remember, if you were part of the webinar a couple of weeks ago, then you'll remember that we talked a little bit about this formula for buy-in. So I just wanted to remind you of that quickly. I think it's important and helpful to think about that. Essentially, what we determined was that to create buy-in, the level of dissatisfaction with the sort of current status quo, plus a vision of what you want things to be like, plus first steps that you're prepared to take, have to be greater than the resistance to change. If that can happen, you can start to create buy-in effectively for your project or for your coordinated access development. In addition, we talked about the importance of creating an introduction to what you're trying to do and listen for that language around buy-in, and then build upon that and capitalize upon that. Then be able to express your vision as a future that will be positive, what's going to make this beneficial to everyone involved and all the stakeholders, and then to be able to craft your story from there and to be able to strategically build that story that's going to enhance the buy-in and help others buy in. And then I wanted to just add something to all of this, where a lot of this boils down to getting the word out about sharing the message of what this is all about. And so these are just a few kind of strategic ways that a lot of communities or organizations have found that simple strategies within these areas will generate lots of interest, lots of awareness, lots of learning. So you've got all of your social media platforms. Are you using those to announce and to talk about your plans, the goal, the vision related to what coordinated access can do or provide for your community? Do you have a local newspaper? I think they still exist for the most part in most communities. So have you thought about putting a story or letting someone from the paper interview someone to talk about it? And that's a great way to broadly get the word out in your community about what's going on, because it's important to have not just sort of direct stakeholder buy-in, but it's important to have the buy-in of the regular community members as well, because they are often the ones who come out in droves to speak out against some of the things that you're doing. So it's important to get that positive message out to them. But in regards to stakeholders, have you made a list of ultimately all of the potential stakeholders that you can possibly think of? And have you sent personal information out to them through email or whatever it is? Have you connected with them directly to share the vision of what you're doing? And then, of course, the old-fashioned way, it still is effective by using posters and bulletin boards. I know that it's not as much right now in COVID days, not as much of a likelihood that people will see it on like a bulletin board at the public library because people aren't frequenting those places. But you know what? Every grocery store I go into, there are bulletin boards, and people are still going to grocery stores. And so there's places that you can find to do this, and people are still out in public. So take advantage and put up posters or flyers or things that just give people some information, or at least direct them to where they can find that information. And then think about asking permission to have announcements about the work that you're doing being put forward at other functions, at other events that are going on, even if it's a virtual event and it might not be directly about homelessness even, but it might be hosting individuals as participants that still might have an interest in that kind of information. So think about these other events that are going on, and you know, people are often making general announcements about things at those events. And so look for opportunities that you can include your information about your coordinated access systems and by name lists and the value of them and so forth in other functions like that. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to help Lisa out here and control the slides for her. And she's going to share some information that she has prepared. And then what we really want to do is, as I've been talking and as now Lisa talks, we want you as a community to be thinking about what are the challenges specifically that we are having in creating buy-in. What are things that we have done that have helped us create buy-in, and be willing to think of and provide some examples, and to be open and share and help us create some conversations. So we'll let Lisa go through her information, and then we want to really just open it up. So again, throw stuff into the chat or into the Q&A so that we know that you have an idea or a thought, and then we'll encourage you as much as we can to speak out and to share it openly with us so we can generate some conversation. This is a community of practice. Okay, so Lisa, you're on.
Thank you so much, Wally.
Sorry.
No problem. I went back and I listened to the webinar that you led, Wally, on March 9th about building buy-in around coordinated access and by name lists. And I pulled out a lot of the information, tips and tricks that you did into this slide here. And so I kind of just wanted to make a list of various multiple approaches and tactics that you might take in the pursuit of getting information out there about coordinated access, requesting the help of others, of specific stakeholders in specific ways to develop coordinated access in your community, or just to the general public, like as you said, Wally. And so I think what I wanted to do by putting them all out there is to say that you might be trying one or more of these at the same time. And you might have to switch it up and constantly think about what is the best approach or tactic that I can take to promote coordinated access in my by name list, depending on where we are in the process of developing it. Maybe you have coordinated access in a by name list in your community, but it's not well used or bought into. Or maybe you have kind of all the nuts and bolts in place, but you're still looking for improvements to that system. So that way you have a coordinated access system that works best for those who work within it. So just diving into one of these, a previous experience of mine was I used to have monthly meetings when I was working in community before I joined the Built for Zero team. used to have monthly meetings with EDs of various programs across the city. So these were like shelters, housing first programs, and we used to get together on a monthly basis to talk about coordinated access. And I'd say to them, like, take a look at this consent form. What do you think about it? Or I'd ask them questions, you know, how are we going to roll out our prioritization criteria? And I'd get a lot of crickets. Like, I'd get a lot of silence, and there wasn't a lot of like engagement from the group. And part of that, I thought, was because I wasn't making the meetings fun enough. And I spent like way too much time like thinking about how I can like make meetings more engaging and fun for people. And then what I realized was I had to try something else that wasn't working. So I kind of mixed more methods in there. And I started to book one-on-one conversations with folks from that group. And I just say, like, let's grab a coffee. In these days, it's probably a virtual coffee. But let's grab a coffee and just like sit down. Can I please have 30 minutes of your time to talk about, you know, what we chatted about during the last meeting that we had? And I get so much more rich information that I could then use to prompt further discussion from the entire group. So you might have to try different approaches and tactics as you go along, depending on kind of what you're seeing. And so don't be kind of stuck in like, this is our engagement plan, this is exactly what it looks like. Allow yourself to be flexible and to try different things, because ultimately the people make up coordinated access systems. You know, it's not just about the policies and procedures and having a beautiful guidebook around coordinated access. It's about the people that are involved and the connections that they have with each other that really make a by name list and coordinated access useful for your community. Another one from here is adopt and continually refine key messages. And maybe somebody can tell me where I heard this, but you have to say something 8 or 9 times before it's actually absorbed from someone. So don't quote me on that, because I remember hearing it, but I'm not exactly sure where from. But I find that to be so true. And so you could say coordinated access is a streamlined process for housing people in your community. And that might not mean much to folks. So if you keep saying that over and over, and you've said it more than the 8 or 9 times, and you still don't feel like people have an understanding to engage around coordinated access, then you might want to shift that message. You might want to shift that definition and kind of change it so that you know what you're saying about coordinated access speaks more to the audience or the person that you're relaying it to. And also refining key messages is important, because oftentimes we have way more on our desks than just by name lists and coordinated access. Oftentimes we have a ton of different files on our desk for projects that we're working on. And so it's what I like to do is every couple weeks, I schedule a few minutes in my calendar, like 10 minutes, and I say, like, what are my 3 key messages that I want to get across over these next weeks? And that might be like an ask from community, like perhaps you really want providers to participate in your data process. You really want folks to send in information or put information into your homelessness management information system to be able to populate your by name list. And so even just taking the time to write that down will help you integrate those messages as you work on the other projects in your community or the other things that you're doing. Or perhaps you really want to get across the message that, you know, coordinated access is this and it's not that. So even taking the time to write down what are your 3 main messages or 3 key things that you want to exude over the next couple weeks can go a long way. It sounds really simple, but I find it really helpful for integrating into the other projects and things that you do. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide, Wally.
Lisa, I just wanted to add something around the bullet you talked about with key messages and saying them over and over again. You're accurate about that point, but I wanted to add too that, you know, you have to remember out of sight, out of mind. And And I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but we were actually within our own organization just talking yesterday morning about our core values of our organization. And I actually happened to be sort of leading a bit of an exercise around that. And one of the things I was sharing is the importance of making sure that your values or your key messages or whatever it is you're talking about are intertwined or interwoven into everything that you do. And like I say, it sounds kind of cheesy, but there's a lot of great evidence around having things printed on things, like how many of you probably have sitting on your desk in front of you now, or at your office, if you're not at your office, a stress ball of some kind that you've taken away from a conference or an event, and whatever is written on that stress ball, it's in your head. And it's because it's sitting there and it's in front of you and you see it. And so it's really valuable to start putting those messages on anything and everything that you can get out to people and have it be something that sits with them or in front of them regularly. All right.
So I put this picture in here. It shows me a few things. And I'm interested if folks want to put in the chat if they've had a similar experience. But what I've seen in communities and from my previous experience was, it took a lot of work to get everybody on this roller coaster or to get everybody involved in coordinated access and enter into a collaborative space and want to contribute and participate in what coordinated access looks like. And then maybe you do like a launch event, or maybe it's not, all of your coordinated access system, but you have your intake process nailed down and you kind of say, okay, I'm pressing the start button on this. I'm going to roll it out to everyone to start now. And then things can fall off. So I've had a previous experience where, I'm talking to folks about coordinated access and by name lists, and I'm getting a lot back saying like, yes, absolutely. I agree to participate. I absolutely want to be part of this. Please collaborate with me. And then when, we actually launch coordinated access or launch a piece of it, then it can get quiet, or they can say, actually, I'm too busy to do X, Y, and Z. Or, what happened with that? What happened with that project? I don't think I saw that email. I'm not sure if I read that one. So it can be really easy to kind of just drop off. And so I think it's important to continually refine your engagement strategies and the way that you communicate around coordinated access, because things will change and you're going to have to keep tailoring your approach to what you're seeing. And so, yeah, if anyone has a similar experience, please post that in the chat. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, Peterborough actually commented saying that they 100% had that happen to them post-launch. Only the people that were forced to be a part of the system were still involved.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Peterborough. And so I wonder, how we can help each other out. What do we do? What do we tailor? What do we change in order to kind of get those folks who were early in the beginning really involved, to get them kind of back on the bus or back into the project? And so if you go to the next slide, Wally, I thought of some other approaches that are.
And I'll just say quickly, Lisa, sorry, it would be great, Peterborough, if later on in the webinar, if you guys could speak to how you handled that. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and so you could try some other different engagement ways to engage folks, or ways to communicate coordinated access and by name lists. And so some examples that I see communities that I work with doing that are working really well is to share good news stories at the beginning of every meeting. And maybe conveniently that story has a piece in it related to coordinated access participation. That's always a great way to kind of remind folks of the why, like why did you why were they so keen to be involved in the beginning, and how do we get that back? So reminding them of what's so great about coordinated access and what can really help our community, or to kind of recognize and lift up those who are working in the system in coordinated access. So that might be, you know, celebrating specific program staff who has supported folks to be housed off of the by name list, or that could mean celebrating, you know, data inputs. If you had a field that was largely not populated in somewhere like HIFIS, and you asked folks to do that, then you could lift up the ones who are really putting the information into HIFIS to kind of incite action from others. Another thing that you could try is to convene the group back together and review your progress, like review all of those great things that led you up the top of that roller coaster. And then you could say, and here's the next goal that we have, or here's the next piece of coordinated access that we want to work on, and see how folks react to that. Because if they still have the reaction of like, I'm too busy for this, or like that won't be possible in that time frame, or that seems really great, how can we change X, Y, or Z about it? Then you just already have that much more information to be able to best tailor your response. And I also think it's important to continue to engage emotions. I see this a lot. There's a lot of ability to kind of draw on people's emotions in the beginning of this work. We show a lot of like great inspirational videos about how coordinated access can reduce and end homelessness. But then it's easy to kind of get inundated and get stuck in writing the policies and procedures and following those. And it's easy to forget about the emotional side. And so you may need to just remind yourself that I need to go back and appeal to emotions again, because it's important throughout the entirety of the process, even though we typically say to really integrate that in the beginning phases of when you're launching your by name list or coordinated access. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, Wally.
Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to give a few ideas of how you could keep a pulse on participation or engagement. So specific to providers, like Wally said in the beginning of this webinar, making a list of all of the stakeholders in your community is a great way to get started in the work of building buy-in. In the by name list and coordinated access scorecard Google Sheet or Google Doc, there's a sheet in there known as the provider participation tool. And it's a really easy way to list all of the providers that you need to participate in coordinated access, whether that be adding or updating the by name list or dedicating housing resources to those on the by name list. And there's these two columns at the end of that spreadsheet that says current status and next steps. And it sounds really simple, and it is. That's the point of it. It's a great way to keep track of, okay, what is my next step with each and every one of these providers? Because their level of engagement will change depending on the relationships that you have, and they may have gotten different messages around coordinated access at different times. And especially in our field, when we have such high staff turnover, it's a great idea to kind of just keep a pulse on what have I said about coordinated access and by name list to them, or what have I tried, and what am I going to try next? So just a tool if you're kind of interested in keeping a pulse on provider participation. And the other is continually assessing stakeholder interest. So if you really don't have a lot of time to get super fancy with a engagement chart or a scale of engagement, just ask yourself, or ask the provider or specific stakeholder, do you want to be informed, consulted, or collaborate? Do you just want to kind of be kept in the loop, know what's going on? Do you want to be consulted at major pieces? Do you want us to ask you for your input when we're kind of deciding the nuts and bolts of coordinated access? And then do you want to collaborate? Do you want to be at the table throughout the entirety of the time when we develop and create coordinated access. And then knowing that that will change, if you're finding that there's a drop off in engagement, you can go back and ask it again. So for example, if you had, a regular monthly meeting with providers in the community around coordinated access or the by name list, and you're not getting a lot of engagement from a specific set of folks or a specific person, you can re-ask them, would you just like to instead receive information when there's a big change in our process, as opposed to being at the table to collaborate each and every time. So just an easy way to kind of keep a pulse on interest in coordinated access and how you can tailor your approach.
I will just add here that our awesome partners at Reaching Home, they are always working in the back end as well to provide as many tools and resources as they can. And so one of the things that they are working on currently, and they will be providing in the next while, is something similar to the provider participation tool. They are calling it a system mapping tool, but it's similar in a lot of ways to the provider participation tool. And so that will be an additional resource that will be available. Also, I think I mentioned this on the 9th, but the TTA, we are in the process right now of completing a community engagement model that can do the things that Lisa is actually talking about, that will help you know where you're at with your levels of engagement and be able to measure that, and also to be able to identify what would be the key strategies and interventions to use at that particular time based on where you're at with your engagement. So those are some other things to look forward to.
So I won't talk for much longer, but I did just want to send a friendly reminder of some things to think about when you're making communications tools. And there's various reasons why you might decide to make a communications tool. It could be to create greater transparency across the community, even including the public at large or other human service systems beyond our homelessness providers. So it could just, get the information out there about coordinated access and allow for some more transparency in the inner workings of how people get housed in the community. It could be to kind of engage with folks that you want to gather their feedback. So it could be used as a way to say, we're developing coordinated access and we want to hear from you. So there's various reasons why you might make a communications tool, but some things to remember are listed in the Built for Zero communications toolkit, but it's not just specific to Built for Zero. There's a lot of great stuff in there around coordinated access, and it also includes some key messages that you can use as well. Also, it's important to always go back to the 101. We often get, acronyms in our line of work, so many acronyms. So, I'm guilty of this, like writing BNL and CA, even when putting this presentation together. So try your best to remember to spell out everything that you're talking about, because, levels of engagement and understanding will vary across even the same audience or a targeted audience. And from the 9th, Wally talked about listening for buy-in talks so that you craft a buy-in story. Also, think about when drafting communications tools, why should they care? What is the proposed or perceived impact to them, to your specific audience? Be clear if you are going to ask anything. So if you are going to ask providers to participate in the by name list or take referrals off the by name list, be as clear as you can in that ask so that it's not ambiguous for them. And then also identify avenues for feedback. So that could be, for more information, go to our website. It could also list emails or a general email box or phone number. But think about, who is the person that wants to collect this feedback and where can they go if they want more information. And then the last slide, Wally, is several examples of communications tools. These are all available on the Coordinated Access website. Both Simcoe and Kawartha have a website related to coordinated access and by name lists and provide a ton of information there, videos, fact sheets. Peterborough, who we heard from in the chat, started monthly report cards, which I am absolutely obsessed with. It's a great way to just regularly give information to community members in bite-sized chunks. You might also consider doing monthly or quarterly newsletters. So there are several of these on the Coordinated Access webpage, and their newsletters are better for when you're developing coordinated access, for example, and you have constantly changing information. If you want to if you can't publish that in a guide yet of all your policies and procedures, but you kind of want to get the information or the ask out there, you can do so in newsletters, so that way you don't have to keep, redoing information sheets or updating information sheets. You can give more information on a regular basis. And the last, I've linked in several videos that are really inspiring. And if I'm ever feeling like kind of inundated in the policy and process of coordinated access, I love to just watch a couple of these videos, and it really reinvigorates me. So there are also things that you could share with your community.
That's awesome, Lisa. Thank you. We do have a couple of comments and questions that are out there. I'm actually going to start with the question that's in the Q&A, and it was sent in by an anonymous attendee. So I'll take that as my cue to know that they would probably rather not speak vocally, which is totally fine. So here is the question. They said, not sure if I'm really off tangent. How would you address territorialism mentality when in the development stage of creating coordinated access, and encourage to have buy-in instead of dealing with increased resistance? So I think if I'm getting this correctly, it's about people who are not in favor of what's happening. Maybe there's resistance, and when I hear territorialism, I hear resistance to this because people feel threatened that this may cause changes in the way that they work, or maybe potentially they feel like it's a fight for funding. Who knows the reasons, but that's kind of what I think of when I hear territorialism. And so how do you create buy-in with those individuals as opposed to just fighting the resistance? So I don't know, Lisa, I'm going to throw it out to you first, and then this is a question that we're opening up to the whole group here that's listening. If you have any thoughts on that. And so, yeah, Lisa, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think, especially in the beginning stages, I think addressing the conflict or addressing the conversation is never a bad idea. So if you're kind of sensing some territorialism, or you're sensing some, my client versus our client mentalities, I would say address it as early as you can. And that might look like going to a specific provider or person individually, or if it's more general feelings, you could always name it and kind of lead a session where you air out all of your concerns with coordinated access, and then collaborate, like say, how can we work together to think about ways to address these concerns? A lot of the hardship with building buy-in around coordinated access and by name lists, I find, is that it really needs to be a collaborative process, and you have to build on the values and mindsets just as much as you need to build policies and procedures. So you might not get it exactly right the first time, or by name list or coordinated access might not operate as beautiful as you intended. And so building up, the mentality across community around values, that it's okay for us to fail, and it's okay for us to fail forward as long as we're learning from it. can really go a long way, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful though.
No, I think that's totally helpful. And what I would say is something similar. And I actually think I talked about this a little bit on the 9th, is I think it's important to realize that if somebody is that adamant in opposition to what you're doing, then if we look at things from a strength-based perspective, what does that tell you about that person? It tells me that they have passion. It tells me that they are someone who, for whatever reason, whether it's what we agree with or not, this matters to them. And so I would suggest looking at it from the perspective of, how do I channel that energy? How do I channel that passion? Or how do I tap into that passion? And how do I look at this based on, maybe I have something that I can learn from this person? And so pull them into that process, as Lisa's talking about, and have a conversation with them. But I would consider framing your conversation based on asking them to help you, understand, what is it about this that matters so much to them? Where does their passion for this come from? And how could that passion possibly be added to the work that you're doing? And how can, and will they participate, if nothing else, to help you understand more so what it is that's wrong with what you're trying to do? And don't be afraid of that, because the likelihood of you both learning something is very high, and that's always a good thing. That's that win-win that Lisa was mentioning earlier. I'm actually wondering if, in regards to that, Aaron from Peterborough had made a couple of comments earlier, and Aaron was very open and willing to share. And I think that Aaron also had a comment to that question. So I'm just going to unmute Aaron here and ask Aaron if you'll go ahead and share some of your thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. So just so when we first started in Peterborough, we had a very large group of people participating in our planning for coordinated access. And that was great. However, we didn't know what our ask was. And although we had a lot of open communication and avenues for feedback from partners, we didn't know what we were asking from them specifically. So a lot of those relationships died off. And because we couldn't define how we wanted people to engage with the system when they weren't primarily providers of homelessness services. And so that led to a lot of challenges where everyone who wasn't a homelessness specific provider kind of stayed in their lane. Now, if we look at silver linings, one thing I will say is that the pandemic has rebooted a lot of the relationships between the homelessness system and the health system, more out of necessity than anything. And the shared goal of trying to manage the pandemic and protect vulnerable populations has resulted in, maybe we're not all on the same page and agreeing, but the conversations have restarted. And we're asking more questions of each other and relying on each other to help provide service for our mutual clients, instead of just passing clients off between sectors. And so I would say, anytime we're trying to look for that kind of collaboration and communication, is to find the shared goal. And if the shared goal isn't ending homelessness, and work towards that, but find if there's another shared goal between your organization and the other organizations, because as soon as you find that, it makes it a lot easier. And that is not something we did in the beginning when we started coordinated access in 2019. And so it is harder to rekindle those relationships, because now we tried something and in their minds failed because we didn't continue that relationship. But as soon as you find that thing that buys them into working with you, it's a lot easier. And if it's not homelessness at the beginning, find out what it is and then work homelessness into it later.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts and for sharing and for posting in the chat links to some of your resources and things. That's awesome. And that's what this is about is sharing. We also had a comment from Elizabeth Freeland, and I wonder, Elizabeth, I would love to hear more about your comment there where you said, remember, we are looking for champions. We don't have to be the champions. Would you say more about that? And I've given you the ability to unmute yourself, and so go ahead.
And thus I have unmuted.
Awesome.
So often we find that territorialism is just something that needs to be refocused. And I think you've really already addressed it, that it's not just territorialism, it's a passion, and we want to harness that passion. But quite often too, when we go looking for champions, if they have a different point of view about the things than we do, we really need to repackage and reharness how they want to move forward. Does that help?
Yeah, totally. Totally. I think that was, a great addition to some of the other comments already made. And it's nice to hear from other people who've had a similar experience. So, and obviously have knowledge of that.
Yes. Maybe a little guilty too.
I was just going to say, is your experience being on the end of the naysayer or the end of the champion side?
Depends on which decade we're talking about.
And what the topic is, maybe, right? No, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
So,
mute me again.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, I will. Any other comments? Again, we want to hear from you. If you have other questions, I don't think I've missed anything in the chat. I don't know, Lisa, I know you've been kind of following. If you've seen anything that we can maybe drag somebody out on, but this is really important stuff to be thinking about, and these are challenges that you're not alone in. These are challenges that all communities face to one degree or another. And so the more you can be connected to each other and share your learnings, the easier it's going to become for everyone. Well, we don't want to be territorial in the knowledge that we've gained either, right? We want to be open and share and give everybody a chance to maybe skip over some of the challenges that we had to face by taking advantage of the learnings we gained from those situations. Lisa, anything else that's sort of on your mind as we're thinking about all of this, and we've heard some of the comments? Anything else pop out for you?
Yeah, I just out of interest, and I think it would be great if anyone has anything to share in the chat or otherwise. Two things. The first is, like, what is your why for coordinated access? Like, what do you say when you talk about coordinated access to your community, of why? Like, why do we need a binding list and coordinated access? Because I think that will just help build some even more natural and organic key messages that you can provide to other folks. So, if you have any ideas around why coordinated access is important for your community, please type that in the chat. And then the other is, what's your most common response? Kind of when you first roll out coordinated access or binding lists, or you first start to talk about it, what's your most common response from community?
So while people are thinking about that, I want to actually jump off on a comment you made in the chat, actually, where you highlighted the idea of the example of a common goal. I'm pretty sure that was you. And I think that's really, really important. And, in some of my other work, I talk to people about effective communication. And one of the things I share with them is this little strategy around sort of 5 key secrets to effective communication. And the number one secret is that if you're having difficulty in communicating with somebody or getting along or engaging, whatever way you want to put it, is to find something you both agree on, even if it's the tiniest little sliver of something, and it doesn't really matter what it is. And so again, the example of this other person who is pushing back against the desire to create coordinated access, they have a passion there. What is it that's the same as you? What is it about their passion or their belief or their concern that's the same as you? And start there and build on what's common from both of you. We have Linda DeChef from Nelson, who is able to be here with us today. And I had talked to her earlier in the week about potentially sharing some thoughts that she's had from the Nelson perspective on developing coordinated access. And so she's available at the moment. And so, and she's letting me know that she's able to talk. So I'm gonna see if I can get her unmuted here and give her that opportunity. So bear with me one second, Linda, as I scroll down and find your name. There we go. You should be able to, it should be good to go.
Hi, can you hear me?
You bet.
Great. So yeah, it's so great to hear from other communities, what they're doing. And also, Wally and Lisa, I really appreciate you summing up, all of what it takes to create buy-in. Yeah, I just agree with everything that you guys said. It's a real change management process, I think, is a way that's been helpful for us to think about it. You need to get people on board in the beginning, and then you need to keep them there, and it just really takes time. Yeah, we've done so much of what you've been talking about, and those ongoing meetings, really getting people's input into different aspects of what we're building. Using that input, people really need to see that their participation has had an impact. One of the things I spoke out about at a previous community of practice, I think about a year ago, was we had an event, and we got people's signatures on a commitment in principle. And an indication of what role they'd like to play. And now here we are a year later, and we're going to be launching our coordinated access system probably in a couple of months. We're going to start doing intakes and assessments with folks. And what we're doing right now with all the partner agencies is asking them to sign a partnership agreement. So it's kind of that next step. And it's like the provider participation tool, but it's something that we're doing individually with each of the partner agencies. And, it's more concrete. It's not legally binding, but it's each partner organization saying, this is the role that we're going to play. We're going to be a door agency. We're going to have intake workers. We're going to make sure they're trained, etc. Or a housing provider, their partnership agreement will say, we're going to bring vacancies to the coordinated access table, and people are signing that. And I think that that's a really key next step for us. It's making it feel really real for people. They're really committed. And part of that partnership agreement is we developed a logo. So that is, branding, it just seems so ethereal and kind of unimportant in the picture of getting people into housing, but it's helped to just make coordinated access in our community seem more real and tangible and concrete. And so, having that logo, having had lots of input from all the stakeholders into the logo and also into drafts of the partnership agreement, I think those have been really helpful for us in developing buy-in. So I just wanted to share that.
No, that's fantastic information, and it's great to see how so much of what you've been doing, is coming. I won't say full circle, because you're not coming around to where you started. You've gone down the road, and that's fantastic. And something that you had said Oh shoot, I had it, now it's gone. I just disappeared, and it was so great. And I had a comment about that, but I lost it. So anyways.
Maybe this will spark it, Wally. I was just gonna say, I so appreciate your point to first, like, viewing it as a change management process is a great way to inform like the tactics that you employ, because it is constantly changing. And then also, I really like your idea about, you know, getting things down and making coordinated access more tangible can really help. Because for a long time, when you're like developing it, it doesn't feel real. Like, you know, you're eventually going to ask providers to add and update a by name list, or you're like, eventually they're going to take referrals off of the list, and it might not seem like real yet or tangible. So I think it's a great way to kind of mark that you are launching it and that you have a logo and that it is something that is going to operate in your community. So I really appreciated that. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, and you actually did spark my memory. It was actually related to moving from that partnership in principle or agreement in principle piece to sort of the more, what I would call, a formal partnership or a formal agreement, as opposed to an informal one where you have this sort of MOU. Like you said, it's not legally binding, but hugely important. And another reason why it's important is because when we talk about the difference between formal and informal linkages, the informal ones are where someone has just said, yeah, hey, you know what, because I work here, I'm really bought into this, and I really want to be part of this, and so I'll do everything I can to help from our organization's end of things. And that's all fantastic until that person gets a new job somewhere else or moves away. And now your linkage is gone. Where when you now have that more formalized kind of agreement or partnership, even though it's not legally binding, it's still a document that sits on people's files. And it allows you something that you can you know, create continuity as staff move on or change or whatever within the system. And so there's always that reminder there of the partnership that was developed and created. So yeah, that was what I was thinking of. So thanks again, Linda and Aaron and everybody else who spoke. You guys were great. It was so helpful to have you part of the webinar. We are 2 minutes past, and we know lots of people, depending upon where you are, need to have lunch, or at the very least a coffee break or a snack break. So I will just say, on behalf of myself, it was great having you today, and it was great having you, Lisa, provide your knowledge and insight. It was a great addition to the webinar, so thank you for that, and I'll leave the last word to you.
It's sunny here. Sorry. I opened with that. I'm ending with that. I am gonna go take a walk outside. But you know, enjoy the snow too.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Have a great day. And again, look on our website for the recording of this and or other webinars from the past. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.